To scrape a website, we first need to understand how it's built. Websites are primarily constructed with HTML and CSS. HTML is the skeleton, it defines the content like titles, paragraphs, and links. CSS is the style, it tells your browser how that content should look. We need to read the HTML to know exactly where our target data is located. To a human, a website is a visual experience, a collection of buttons, images, and text arranged perfectly on a screen. But a web scraper doesn't have eyes. It doesn't care about your padding top or your hex codes. To a browser and to your scraper, a website is a document object model or the DOM. Think of the DOM as a family tree for data. When the browser loads the HTML file, it translates it to its live hierarchical tree structure. Every title, every link, and every product price is a node living on a specific branch. This is where the architect side of scraping comes in. To get the data you want, you aren't just copy pasting text off a screen. You are navigating this tree, climbing from the trunk to the branches until you find the exact node that holds your target data. Now that we understand the DOM is a massive tree of data, the next question is how do we actually point our scraper to the right branch? In the world of scraping, we call these locators. There are three main ways to find your data, and each one has its own superpower. First, we have the CSS selectors or query selectors. Since websites already use CSS to style elements, we can hit right on those existing labels. If a developer tagged a price with the class price, you simply tell your scraper find everything with that tag. It is fast, it is readable, and it is the gold standard for 90% of your scraping tasks. If the UI is well structured, this is your best way to get the data. But what happens when the developer didn't give that price a class name? Or what if you need to find a button only if the next text to it says add to cart? That's where XPath comes in. XPath is a query language used to parse through XML and HTML documents. XPath is like a highly precision GPS. Unlike CSS, it can move backwards up the tree. It allows you to say, find the table row that contains the word iPhone, then move two cells to the right to find the stock level. It's more complex, but it is the closest thing we have to SQL query for the web. Let's understand the XPath with an example. I will head to one of the online tools present for XPath. So here is an online tool from the freeformatter.com. As you can see, there is one box here to copy paste the XML structure, or you can actually upload your file itself. But we are going to take this example from over here and perform some operations on it. So I'm going to just paste it over here. Now, as you see that there is a tag, the initial root tag. Then inside this root tag is the actors tag, which have three actors. Then there is a singers tab inside which we have singer 4, 5, and 6. So what if you want to actually get all the actors? You will need to do something like this. So I'm going to enter in this XPath expression over here. So inside this, I'll be going with forward slash, and I'm going to say root because that is our first tag. Inside it, I will actually go with actors, and I will give another slash. Let me go with actor since we want all these actor tags. Let's check with those. So yeah, as you can see, it has listed as the elements actor tag with ID 1 Christian Bale, actor tag with ID 2 Liam Neeson, and Michael Caine. What if we just want these values and not all this information about it? Because that is not really helpful for us. Otherwise, you get this text values with this text method. So as you can see, we have extracted the Christian Bale, Liam Neeson, and Michael Caine, the name of all the actors. Similarly, you can actually get the singers, but this method that we have used, this method of expression, is actually called as the absolute XPath. Absolute XPath means that we are starting from the root node and then going towards the data that we actually require. Another method of XPath expression is relative XPath. So herein we don't really need to start with the root node. We need to, or root tag, we need to just go towards what we want. So I'm going to just go with double forward slash and then an. So this is also another way of getting the data that we want. And to be honest, relative XPath is actually better than absolute XPath, because even if the values change for the above tags, we really get what we want from over here. Another online tool is this xpather.com. It gives you a simple example over here, and you can perform some operations on it. So if you want to select everything, you just go ahead with this task. So it selects all the text information from over here. Now, if you want to get a specific thing from this, like for example, I want to get this note from the extra notes. So I'm going to go with note. So it gives me the 4 notes that are present, 4 note tags that are present over here. Similarly, if I want to get note 4th only, so I will just declare it in the square brackets and type 4. So I'm going to get this particular note. And this is a better tool because it helps us visualize what data we are actually extracting, and in the same window itself. So you can check out more towards XPath. Now moving. So we have understood what XPath is. Now the third thing that helps in the world of web scraping is the regular expression, or regex. If you have like a software engineering background, or even if you have some basic information about coding, so you have heard about regex. So it is used for cleaning and extracting specific data from raw text, and it is also a kind of a query language. It is similar to XPath, and it uses symbols and patterns to strip the data. Then comes the POM. POM is a design pattern that creates an abstraction layer between your scraping logic and the website's actual HTML structure. Instead of putting your CSS selectors or XPath directly into your main code, you create a dedicated class for each page of the website. For example, if you have a product page, you create an object for that. You have a login page, you create an object for that, and so on. And why this is the architect's choice? Because if a developer changes the price ID from hashtag old price to hashtag new price, you only need to change it in one place. That is the page object. And every script using that page is instantly fixed. So your main script stops looking like a mess of symbols and XPath and start looking like a human language. So web scraping involves 2 main components. First, the crawler, or more commonly known as the spider. Second is the parser. Before we can extract a single row of data, we have to find it. This is the job of the web crawler, often called as a spider. Think of it as a scout. It starts at a home node and automatically follows every link it finds to map out the entire architecture of the website. While it might look complex, but its goal is simple: efficiency. It is the tool that we use to build a massive directory of product pages or articles, so we know exactly where to send our scraper later. Once the crawler has found the URLs, we move into the actual how of the scraping. These are the gears that must turn in sync for your code to work. First up is parsing. This is the core digestive process of your script. You have downloaded a massive blob of HTML code. Parsing is the act of taking that raw code and turning it into a structured format like a Java object or an Excel row. You scrap the page to get the HTML, but you parse it to extract the specific price or the product name. Then there is the API, or the shortcut. Before you commit to complex parsing, always check for an API, or application programming interface. Think of an API as a direct line to the website's database. Instead of fighting with messy HTML, an API gives you the data in a clean, structured format like JSON. In the world of data architecture, we can always check for an API first. It's cleaner, faster, and much less likely to break the traditional scraping. Next, we have request headers. This is your scraper's ID card. Every time your code talks to a server, it sends extra pieces of information like the user agent or referrer. These headers tell the website, I'm using Chrome on Windows. If your headers are missing or look suspicious, the server will spot your bot instantly and shut the door. We are going to be talking about user agent later in the video. Now let's move towards pagination. Most data isn't on one page. It's spread across page 1, 2, 3, and so on. A professional scraper needs the logic to find the next button, click it, and keep going until there is no data left. Without handling pagination, you are only ever getting 10% of the story. Finally, we have infinite scroll. This is the modern version of pagination, common on social media and e-commerce. Content only loads as you scroll down. This is where UI UX design knowledge comes in handy. When you trigger a scroll, you often see skeletal loaders, those gray pulsing blocks that appear while real data is being fetched from the database. A scraper cannot just read a skeleton loader. It has to be smart enough to wait for those placeholders to be replaced by actual data before it attempts to parse the page. It requires a headless browser to simulate that human scroll and wait behavior. So, what really are headless browser? It is basically a browser without a GUI or a graphical user interface. So it runs invisibly in the background. To handle the modern web's complexity, we often deploy a headless browser, which is essentially a web browser like Chrome or Firefox running without a GUI. From a UI UX perspective, it's like running the engine of a car without the bodywork. It allows your scraper to act like a human by executing JavaScript, clicking buttons, and waiting for dynamic content to render. While tools like Playwright or Selenium are powerful solutions for scraping heavy data, client-side applications, they are also primary target for browser fingerprinting, as security systems specifically hunt for the missing UI element that reveals a bot's identity. We're also going to be seeing browser fingerprinting in detail later on. Looking at the web scraping with an ethical perspective, web scraping exists in a gray area. While the data might be public, the way you access it can have real world consequences. To stay safe and responsible, you need to understand the social contract of the web. First, we look at the public domain data. This is information visible to anyone without logging in. Generally, this is safer to scrape than private data, but you must still respect copyright and fair use. Just because you can scrape a product image doesn't mean you have the legal right to pre-publish it for your own profit. Before your script even hits the first page, it should look for two critical files. The robots.txt is the site's no entry sign. It tells the bot exactly which parts of the site are off limits. Complementing this is the sitemap.xml. Think of this as the site's official directory. It's a gift to the scrapers because it lists every important URL in a neat, machine readable format, helping you avoid unnecessary blind crawling. Let's see how you can actually find the sitemap and the robots.txt of a particular website. So let us try to find the sitemap and robot.txt of any e-commerce application platform. Let's do it for Flipkart. So I'm going to open Flipkart right now. And we are basically trying to get to the home page, but this is something, some different URL over here. So I'm going to just remove this and I'm going to type in robots.txt. And herein we can actually see that the file is loaded and it actually contains some information about the allowed pages and the disallowed pages. So you can see that some of these pages are already here. So the reviews are not allowed. The dynamic section is not allowed. The card section, which can contain the information of the user, is not allowed to be scraped. So you get all these pages that are disallowed. So the scraper should not actually scrape these points from here. Now, coming to the sitemap, similar way you can find the sitemap X as well. So I'm going to try and go to sitemap.xml. it says here that this page is moved or deleted. So it might be that since Flipkart is a very big site and they can have like a lot of web pages in it, maybe 100 or maybe even 1,000 web pages inside this uh, site. So they can have multiple sitemaps in that case. So you can actually try to find it using sitemap underscore index.xml. So when there are multiple sitemaps, there is one master sitemap for the particular website like Flipkart. So if you click on that, you can get it. Well, we are not really getting a sitemap for this. So in case you cannot actually find a sitemap, you can always go back to your robots.txt. The robots.txt file certainly will contain the sitemap. So I'm going to just scroll down. And as you can see, there are sitemaps listed over here. Now, remember to not open this sitemap with the GZ at last. This means that this is going to be a zip file. So as if you actually go ahead and open it in another tab, you are actually going to trigger a download. Since this is a compressed file, so you're going to trigger the download. And we don't want to really download it. We just want to see the sitemap. So you can actually take any other URL that doesn't have a GZ in the end. So I'll go ahead and click on this. So yeah, so there is the sitemap and it looks like this. Since sitemap is a .xml document, so there are some user defined tags over here. So there is a location tag and there is a last modified tag in each sitemap. And this is the sitemap index that you're looking at. And there are multiple sitemaps in this website since it is a very big website. So coming back to our next buzzword, so there is the crawl delay. This is a directive found in robots.txt asking you to wait a specific number of seconds between multiple requests. Ignoring this is the fastest way to trigger a denial of service. If your scraper hits a small server too hard, it can crash the site entirely, turning an ethical data project into a cyber attack. So just be careful and comply to this crawl delay mentioned in the robots.txt file. Finally, we have the terms of service or TOS. This is the legal contract you accept just by using a site. Many modern platforms explicitly forbid scraping in their terms of service. As an architect, you must weigh in the value of the data against the risk of receiving a cease and desist letter for breaking these digital rules. To wrap everything up, let's look at the anatomy of a particular request, or in simple words, your scraping checklist, or the things you should follow while scraping a particular website. Before you run your code, you should follow these 6 simple steps in order to ensure your scraping project is successful and professional. First up, you need to check robots.txt. Your very first step should always be this file. This is the website way of telling you which areas are open for the bots and which are strictly off limits. Checking this first ensures you are respecting the site's boundaries right from the start. Then step 2 is to look for the sitemap.xml. Instead of clicking every link manually to find the pages, the sitemap gives you a ready-made directory of every important URL on the site. It's the fastest and most efficient way to find the data you need without wasting resources. Then third, you need to set a realistic user agent. This is a small piece of text that tells the server that you are using a standard browser like Chrome or Safari instead of a basic script. This simple step helps you stay under the radar and avoid being blocked immediately. Now, decide on the locator. This is how you point your scraper to the exact piece of information you want to grab. Whether you are using the simplicity of CSS selectors or advanced power of XPath. Once you have grabbed the data, it often is a bit messy. So use the regular expression or regex to clean it up. For example, if you scraped a price that looks like 1250 cents. Regex allows you to strip away the symbol and just keep the clean numbers you need for your database. Finally, it is time to save your work. You can export this data as a JSON file to your application or a CSV file if you want to open it in Excel. And just like that, you have turned a messy website into a structured, valuable data asset. Now that we know how to navigate a site and find data, we need to talk about identity. Every time your scraper makes a request, it isn't just asking for data, it is introducing itself to the server. If you don't manage this identity carefully, the website will instantly know you are a bot and shut you out. The most basic part of your identity is the user agent. This is a specific header sent out with your request that tells the website exactly which browser and operating system you are using. If you leave this blank or use a default library name like Python requests, the server will block you immediately. To stay hidden, scrapers must spoof or fake the string to look like a standard user on Chrome or Safari. But a user agent is just one piece of the puzzle. Request headers are the full set of handshake details that you send, including things like referrer, which tells the site which page you just came from, and accept language. Website check these to see if you look like a real person browsing naturally. If these headers are missing or inconsistent, it is a massive red flag for the anti-bot software. Finally, we have cookies in session. These are small pieces of data that a website uses to remember you. If you are scraping data behind a login, your scraper needs to handle session management to pass these cookies back and forth correctly. Without a valid session cookie, the server will treat every single request as a brand new anonymous user, which often triggers security alerts or simply logs you out. In short, user agent is your name, headers are your credentials, and cookies are your access badge. Mastering these three ensures your scraper isn't just powerful, but also invisible. Until now, we have talked about how to find and pull data, but modern websites don't just leave their doors open. They use massive global infrastructures called CDNs or content delivery networks to protect their data and to speed up performance. For a scraper, a CDN isn't just a performance booster, it is your primary security guard. To understand the obstacle, you have to understand the map. The origin server is the website's home base where the real database actually lives. But you usually talk to an edge server, also known as a POP or point of presence. These are local servers scattered around the world that store a copy of the data. When you make a request, you either get a cache hit, meaning the CDN had the data ready for you, or a cache miss, which forces the CDN to go all the way back to the origin to fetch it. If you are scraping, you have to watch out for purging, where the site deletes old data to refresh it. Some advanced scraper try a direct to origin technique, attempting to find the server's real IP to bypass the CDN's security entirely. That gatekeepers, CDNs, matter because they house the WAF or web application firewall. This is an AI driven shield that analyzes your request in milliseconds. If it detects you are a script, it triggers anti-bot protection like a challenge page or CAPTCHA. Those click the traffic lights boxes design specifically to stop automated scripts. They also monitor IP reputation and rate limiting. If your IP has a history of botting, or if you send more than say 10 requests per minute, the CDN will backhole your connection instantly. Even if you get through, you might face a honeypot, a trap link invisible to humans but visible to your code. One click and you're banned. Even if you bypass the firewall, the data itself might be hidden. Modern sites use AJAX and dynamic rendering to reload content after the initial page loads. If your scraper only reads the initial HTML, the page will look empty. You need to handle these asynchronous updates, often by simulating scrolls or finding the internal API calls the site is making behind the scenes. The most advanced opticals are fingerprinting. Browser fingerprinting collects dozens of tiny details like your screen resolution and fonts to realize you are a bot even if you change your IP. More subtle is the TLS fingerprinting or JA3. This analyzes the way your code shakes hands with the server during a secure connection. Standard libraries like Pythons have a very specific handshake that looks different from a human using Chrome, allowing CDNs to block you before a single byte of HTML is ever exchanged. These obstacles are designed to distinguish the signal from the noise. As a web scraper, your job isn't to break these walls, but to blend into your traffic so perfectly that the gatekeepers never even look at you. We have seen the fortress and now we have seen the guards. Now it's time to learn how to walk right past them. In professional web scraping, we don't just try harder, we use workarounds to stay invisible and bypass those high levels of obstacles. The most powerful tool in your kit is IP rotation. If a website sees 1,000 requests in 1 minute from a single IP address, it is going to ban you instantly. But if that website sees one request from 1,000 different IPs, it looks like 1,000 different people browsing naturally. IP rotation is the process of switching your address for every request, ensuring that no single identity ever triggers a rate limit or a red flag. To achieve this rotation, we use proxies. A proxy is a server that sits between your scraper and the website, masking your real IP with its own. But you need to know that not all proxies are created equal. Your choice of proxy strategy determines whether you are a loudbout or a ghost. There are two main types of proxies you will encounter. Data center proxies are fast, cheap, and come from massive server farms like AWS or Google Cloud. They are great for high speed scraping on sites with basic security. But because their IP addresses are clearly labeled as servers, they are very easy for modern CDNs to detect and block. If you hit a wall with data center IPs, you upgrade to residential proxies. These are IP addresses assigned by the ISPs to actual homes, real people with real Wi Fi routers. The they are significantly more expensive and slightly slower, but they are almost impossible to block because the website can't tell the difference between your scraper and a genuine customer. Your strategy is simple: start with the efficiency of data center IPs and rotate in residential proxies only when you need to bypass those boss level security systems. By combining these with the identity spoofing we have learned, you can build a scraping engine that is truly unstoppable.